"2022 marks 30 years since notorious identity thief Kirby made his video game debut, giving Nintendo yet another bankable mascot, which brought their total to 16, I think. So happy 30th birthday, Kirby. You don't look a day over 360 degrees, because you are Uncircle."
Kirby has never achieved the mainstream adoration of Mario, the industry relevance of Zelda, or the die-hard appeal of Metroid, but for 3 decades he's been there, welcoming players to Nintendo's various consoles with a big hug, a bigger smile, and a digestive system I'd rather not understand.
In order to celebrate the little pink puffball, as well as to mark the recent release of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, we decided to revisit each of his games and rank them from worst to best, all while trying to avoid saying "aww" every time he does something cute. We failed at that bit, but we did do the ranking. And just where did Forgotten Land rank? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's not number 16, which raises a further question. What is number 16? You'll just have to watch and find out.
So without further a-waddle-do, let's get to the rules. As always, we will not be counting ports, collections, or remakes. Kirby has had a lot of those, and some are quite good, but you know us. We never bend the rules. We just sometimes forget them, ignore them, or carelessly misinterpret them.
We also won't be counting appearances by Kirby in other games, most notably the Super Smash Bros. Series, because that's a different topic entirely, and that fan base frightens us. We love you, but we are also terrified of you as well.
And that's it, really. Unlike many Nintendo series, Kirby has had a pretty straightforward career, without getting bogged down by browser games, LCD handhelds, CDI abominations, or anything else along those lines. So we get to focus on good, wholesome cartoon fun today. It's a nice change of pace, that.
Let's rank 'em. I'm Kirben.
And I'm King PPP. No way, I'm not that. I don't want to. Can I have another name, please? And this is every Kirby video game, ranked from worst to best.
Number 33, Kirby Slide, 2003, e-reader. Right, well, we do this to ourselves, choosing to rank every game. If there were an entire batch of disposable Kirby e-reader games, we could get away with one big entry about them, dedicating maybe 10 words to each and moving on, or even better, we could just set a ground rule up front that we weren't going to count them. That would have been heavenly. But when there's only one, well, it's not really fair to exclude it, is it? And so we're stuck, devoting some measurable portion of our lives to talking about Kirby Slide, a game consisting of a single sliding puzzle distributed on a little paper card. You'd scan it into the Game Boy Advance e-reader, boot it up, realize seconds later that you, like everybody else on the planet, hates sliding puzzles, and then you'd feed the card to a shredder. You're not even unscrambling a good picture of Kirby, he's just howling into the void, I think. On the bright side, the game was never actually sold. The card was distributed via toy stores and magazines, seemingly in North America only, and was intended to advertise a cartoon block known as the Fox Box. Now, I'd love to tell you more about the Fox Box, but those words in that sequence are on my list of things to never Google. Instead, you will have to listen to me kill just a little more time so that this entry doesn't feel too slight compared to the others on this list. And we're done. Perfect. Moving on. Number 32. Kirby's Pinball Land, 1993. Game Boy. It must be a great feeling when you realize that the popular character you've created is also a geometric shape. It opens you up to spin-off possibilities for life, and Kirby's first spin-off is, on the surface, a fitting one. Kirby is a ball? Pinballs are balls. What do you need? A roadmap? It falls down, however, in execution. Pinball video games tend to go one of two ways. Sometimes they are straightforward score attacks that are similar to actual pinball tables you might find in the wild. One example would be 1984's aptly named Pinball. It's about earning a high score and then, in true principal Skinner fashion, trying to break that record. Otherwise, as in Mario Pinball Land, you use the mechanics of pinball to progress through a linear adventure. You're defeating enemies and solving puzzles, but you're using a ball and flippers in order to do so. Each approach can work, but Kirby's Pinball Land doesn't quite connect with either. It's too complex to be a simple score attack and relies too much on the unpredictable whims of various obstacles to be a fair challenge. Now, I'm sure you'll tell me to get good, and I hope you'll feel silly saying that about Kirby's Pinball Land of all things, but it's not that the game is difficult, it's that it gets annoying to whittle down a boss's health only for a bad flip or rebound to require you to start over. That's neither challenging nor fun, it's just repetitive. Number 31. Kirby no Omo Chabako. Yes, 1996, Satellaview. Forgive me if I just call this one Kirby's Toy Box, okay? Those are words I at least know I am pronouncing correctly. Kirby's Toy Box was the name given to a handful of Kirby-themed minigames downloadable through Nintendo's Satellaview service, and of course, it suffered the same fate as much other Satellaview content. Unless you could find a cartridge that still has this data saved on it, it was lost forever. Over time, fans have been able to track the various minigames down bit by bit, a few here, a few there, until, at the time of writing, just about all of it has finally been recovered. We are still missing 2 minigames from Kirby Superstar that were available here as standalone downloads, but the unique content has finally been put back together. Is any of it great? I'm so glad you asked. Precisely none of it is great. Many Kirby games have little minigames off to the side, and these are about as interesting and engaging as those are, but without the virtue of being attached to a full, better game. Yes, what was essentially DLC for the Super Famicom would have been necessarily small and simple, but these aren't worth seeking out as anything more than a curiosity. The games are Baseball, Pinball, Starbreak, Round and Round Ball, Cannonball, Arrange Ball, Pachinko, and Ball Rally. Balls for all, basically. As a piece of Kirby's history, it's fascinating. As anything else? Well, at least there wasn't a sliding puzzle. Number 30. Team Kirby Clash Deluxe, 2017, 3DS. The traditional release a bonus game as a standalone purchase approach was in full swing here, with Team Kirby Clash from Planet Robobot getting its time in the sun as Team Kirby Clash Deluxe. And by getting its time in the sun, I mean Nintendo got a chance to find out how much money they could squeeze out of the little pink blob with microtransactions. Hooray! Team Kirby Clash was a fun enough diversion when it was attached to Planet Robobot. You and up to 3 friends took part in a sort of abbreviated Kirby role-playing game, not a JRPG, more of a KRPG. You choose your class, fight bosses, and, well, okay, that was basically the whole game. It was pretty good though, and it left a lot of room for a standalone release, or 2, to fulfill the KRPG promise, Sadly, the standalone game doesn't really build on the experience that much. There's more to it, yes, but the bosses are also damage sponges, taking a lot of time to defeat. This is meant to encourage you to level up and do better next time, so it's fine, I'm joking. It's actually to encourage you to spend real world money to buy fake world money that lets you get better gear. Of course, you don't have to spend your money. You could just wait around for 12 hours or so each time you want another shot at progressing. And that certainly sounds fun, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Oh, it doesn't? Weird. It's almost like Nintendo knew that. Number 29. Super Kirby Clash, 2019, Switch. But don't you worry, because the next Kirby Clash game will have a 3rd chance to give us the Kirby RPG of our dreams. And no, sorry, it's another free-to-play game because God hates us! Now, I have no way of knowing whether or not Nintendo makes more money from these games being packed with microtransactions than they would have made if they'd just, let us buy them. From a business standpoint, perhaps this makes a lot of sense, but it seems wrong. In a famously child-friendly series on famously child-friendly consoles, the approach feels dirty. Buy Little Ashton a $10 game and you can all but guarantee she'll have plenty of fun, but let Little Ashton download a game for free, hoping against hope that she never works out how to charge your credit card for digital Kirby bucks, and there can be no happy ending. But wait, did I call this the next Kirby Clash game? I certainly did, but I shouldn't have. It's Team Kirby Clash Deluxe again, only with online multiplayer, better graphics and almost nothing else. It's no less predatory in its monetization, but it allows you to spend more money on in-game currency than you were able to spend at once before, so we're glad to see the developers made the most important updates to the experience. It's a little disappointing that the phrase Kirby RPG didn't inspire Nintendo to create anything more interesting than a cash register. Number 28. Kirby's Star Stacker, 1997. Game Boy. Every great handheld needs at least one perfect puzzle game, right? The Game Boy had half a dozen at least, and it also had Kirby's Star Stacker, which is something. To be clear, it isn't bad. It's a perfectly competent falling block puzzler, but perfectly competent isn't really reason enough to dig it up again 15 years later. We did, and then we played it, and then we stopped playing it, and then we forgot again that it ever existed. At first glance, it might seem similar to Tetris or Columns, but it plays far more like Yoshi, released in 1991 for the NES. That game saw you stacking baddies between two halves of Yoshi eggs to make them disappear. This game also does that, except you can do it horizontally, and you're stacking stars between Kirby's animal friends. There's not much else to it. King Dedede sometimes causes blocks to rise up from the bottom, giving you a little less room to work with until you clear things up a bit, but that's it. The game received an enhanced SNES port a year later called Kirby no Kira Kizu. It keeps going, because they were worried I wouldn't have enough Japanese to struggle within this script. It didn't come to the West, which is unfortunate because it's superior in every way, not least because it adds a story mode that was lacking in the original game. As you can imagine, the story about Kirby putting blocks around other blocks to make the blocks between the blocks disappear is really good. Right, okay, it's obviously not, but the game looks better, sounds better, and has convenient multiplayer, so there. Number 27. Kirby's Avalanche, 1995. SNES. Boy, developer Compile just knew that the West would love its Puyo Puyo series, so long as it were called anything other than Puyo Puyo. In 1992, the first arcade game got a fairly standard English localization, but the home releases changed their names as though embarrassed by their families. 1993 saw Mega Drive fans blessed with Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. 1995 saw American PC gamers get Quirks, and that same year, SNES owners got Kirby's Avalanche. And yet, they are all Puyo Puyo, with superficial changes being almost exclusively the only differences between them. This game specifically was a rebranded version of 1993's Super Puyo Puyo. And how is it? Well, it's exactly as good as Super Puyo Puyo. You match blobs with a focus on creating chains and dumping rubbish blobs on your opponent. An avalanche of them, if you will, hence the title. Unless, of course, you were in Europe, where we called it Kirby's Ghost Trap for what I'm sure must have been a very good reason. There is a story mode, which consists of head-to-head matches against a series of enemies, but don't worry, Kirby lore masters. According to the Kirby wiki, the game's storyline does not fall into the canon and certainly does not reflect Kirby as a character in the main series. Phew. I was very concerned about precisely where a Puyo Puyo reskin would fit into my meticulously constructed Kirby timeline. Ultimately, it's a Kirby game in name only, and there's no reason to track it down. Snow? Like an avalanche? No? Nothing? That's cold. That's another one. Also snow related. Applause now. Number 26. Kirby Mass Attack, 2011. DS. Early in the DS's lifespan, games sought to make as much use of the system's unique features as possible, oftentimes at the expense of the overall quality of the game. That's understandable to an extent. New hardware is exciting, it's a new toy for developers to have fun with. I get that. What I don't get is why a Kirby game fitting that exact description was released for the DS after the 3DS came out. Kirby Mass Attack feels like an early DS game in the sense that it's full of ideas but offers only a glimpse of what better execution might look like. And yet, the DS was already in the rearview mirror. Did Nintendo make this game in 2004 and just forget to release it for 7 years? The end result is a game that manages to feel both slight and bloated at the same time. You use the stylus to tap, flick, and drag up to 10 Kirbys around the touchscreen, again and again and again. Then the game keeps going. Kirby Mass Attack is not long, but if you bother to tap, flick, and drag yourself to the end of it, you'll have aged about a decade. The game is imprecise to the point that losing Kirbys will rarely feel like your fault, and whilst it's certainly cute, it also has an emphasis on pace-breaking puzzles and an irritating reliance on imperfect controls. It's a gimmick-heavy Kirby game released long after anybody wanted one, and it doesn't provide much of a reason to revisit it. Number 25. Kirby Fighters Deluxe, 2014. 3DS. Kirby Fighters Deluxe is an expanded version of one of the modes in Kirby Triple Deluxe, and if you think I'm going to struggle for words when filling out this entry, just wait until I also need to talk about its sequel. The original side mode version of Kirby Fighters was a perfectly fine diversion, not least because it was just some free extra content. Releasing an expanded game on its own as a paid download suggests that, well, that it's worth paying for, and I'm not entirely sure that Kirby Fighters Deluxe clears that hurdle. For starters, there's little reason to own this if you already have Triple Deluxe, unless the Kirby Fighters mode were the runaway highlight for you. It's basically a stripped-down version of Smash Bros. In which you can only play as Kirby and only use abilities from Kirby games. With Kirby and Smash Bros. Sharing a pedigree, the quality is here, but the depth isn't. It's a novelty, and it feels markedly less novel the more time you spend with it. The addition of online multiplayer would have gone a long way towards justifying this as its own release. Online matches provide an endless wealth of content after all, but instead you're limited to download play, which the side mode version had anyway. There's a few minutes of fun to be had here, but rare is the person who will get hours of fun out of it. In households that had multiple 3DS consoles, this might indeed kill some time, but more time would be killed, and in better ways, with a single copy of Triple Deluxe.
Number 24, Kirby Battle Royale 2018, 3DS. Kirby Fighters Deluxe left us more than a little cold, being as the entire thing boiled down to hitting each other and avoiding stage hazards. With Kirby Battle Royale, however, you hit each other and avoid stage hazards. Right, okay, but it is more fun for a while, kind of. Look, I'm just trying to be positive, okay? Released precisely 1 hour before the phrase Battle Royale started referring to things that were nothing like Kirby Battle Royale, this is a sort of party game / arena fighter / minigame collection, and it's every bit as unfocused as that sounds. Still, it does have online play, which is good. Or it was good, until Nintendo decided to murder the 3DS in cold blood. The various modes are not created equal, as might be expected, but they're all simple enough that it can lead to frantic fun with friends. Basically, if you've played any other Kirby game and got the most mileage out of their multiplayer minigames, Kirby Battle Royale gives you an entire mess of similarly simple competitions. Some of them are team-based, some of them are every spherical pink person for themselves, and most of them devolve into all-out chaos. Download play means the game isn't a complete bust without online multiplayer, but if you can get 3 friends together and convince them to spend the night playing Kirby Battle Royale, well, then you have better friends than I do. Actually, will you be my friend? Leave a comment below if you will be my friend. Number 23, Kirby Squeak Squad 2006 DS. I'm sure there are people out there for whom Kirby Squeak Squad, or Kirby Mouse Attack if you want to get European about this, is the bee's knees. Or is that the mouse's blouses? I don't know, leave me alone. For the rest of us though, this is the Kirby game that's very easy to forget. There's very little that one can do here that can't be done better in other games, and the levels are often so short that you can blaze through an entire world in less than 30 minutes without rushing. There's a sort of gimmick here. It's the DS, so of course there's a gimmick, in the form of the titular Squeak Squad. As you seek out each level's treasure chests, the squad can appear, nab a chest from you, and then need to be chased down and defeated if you want to take it back. Keep in mind though that there's little more to it than what I just said, and what I just said isn't all that fun or interesting. I should know because I nodded off while saying it. It's actually 2 half takes stitched together with about half an hour's snoring cut out from the middle of the sentence. The more notable gimmick is the series of touchscreen minigames, all of which are fun for exactly half a minute. Other slight wrinkles to the gameplay, such as the elemental puzzles, do little to make Squeak Squad stand out. Again, I'm sure somebody out there absolutely adores the game, and that's okay. It's certainly not bad, but it's certainly not great either. And that's just the way that Kirby Squeak Squad makes you feel. Number 22, Kirby Canvas Curse 2005 DS. If you played Yoshi Touch and Go and thought this would probably be better if it was an actual game, then congratulations, you played Yoshi Touch and Go. Kirby Canvas Course, or Kirby Power Paintbrush if you want to do a Simon Miller impression in every entry about this, takes the same basic concept and, does actual stuff with it. Like Yoshi Touch and Go, you don't control the characters directly. Instead, you place lines to help them avoid various obstacles, and that's around 80% of what you do for the entire game. Otherwise, you can steal a handful of abilities and tap Kirby for a burst of speed, but those are just flourishes. Your control over the little ball boy is intentionally minimal, making even the simplest stages feel like a puzzle, which I do mean as a compliment. Little of the game is especially complex, but keeping Kirby moving and out of danger does require some pretty good reflexes and the ability to think ahead. It's a game built around the touchscreen rather than one that leans on it for an unnecessary gimmick, and that's nice. Less nice is the fact that it still feels empty. The lack of side modes is glaring, especially when you consider how short the game is. As a showcase of the then new DS and the kinds of gameplay it would make possible, it's alright, but it also feels half-baked, as though the developers were trying to sell the public on a console that even they couldn't get a complete game out of. How appropriate then that Canvas Curse got its follow-up on the Wii U. Number 21, Kirby Superstar, 1996, SNES. The box advertises Kirby Superstar as being 8 games in one. That sounds wonderful, but it's also your first indication that this is a quantity over quality release. There's Samurai Kirby, which is a single button reaction game. There's Megaton Punch, which is another single button reaction game, and then on the traditional side of things, there's Spring Breeze, a truncated, worse remake of Kirby's Dream Land, and Dynablade, in which Kirby beats up a bird. On the more experimental side, there's Gourmet Race, in which you and Dedede gobble up food. This one's essentially worthless aside from its incredible music. There's the Great Cave Offensive, which is offensively boring. Some sources refer to it as a Metroidvania, but it's not. Yes, you absorb abilities from enemies, but that's not like Metroid or Castlevania, that's just Kirby. Here, though, you do it in a long, winding series of rooms that contain treasures. It's horrid. Then there are 2 unlockable games. Revenge of Meta Knight is not bad, actually. It's over before it ever begins, but it is fine. Milky Way Wishes is the most robust and best made mode in the game, but to even play it, you'll need to complete the other, far less fun games first. Kirby Superstar offers a lot of content, but much of it is actively disappointing, and the best of it really isn't that great. Oh, we know, you disagree. By all means, vent your spleens, that's what the comment section's for, but we're just happy to move on to the better games rather than the 8 half-hearted shrugs of Kirby Superstar. Number 20, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, 2004, Game Boy Advance. Kirby had 3 games on the GBA. Nightmare in Dreamland was a remake of Kirby's Adventure. Kirby Slide was like sitting down in a dark cinema to find that your seat's previous occupant had bladder control problems. And so the only proper one was Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. And that's disappointing. To put the positives up front, the game looks excellent. Indeed, there might not be a better fit for the cartoon-ready hardware of the GBA than Kirby, a sentient notebook doodle. And the idea of exploring large interconnected maps is a good one. The game itself, however, leaves a lot to be desired, and it simply isn't much fun. Kirby games overall walk a tight line. The simplicity of the gameplay is in itself appealing, but if you don't complicate that simplicity, the games feel too similar and grow stale. Then again, if you do complicate it, you run the risk of dampening the appeal altogether, relying on unsuccessful gimmicks that are less fun than what they're burying. And that's what happens here, with levels and puzzles relying on the existence of multiple Kirbys. If you can find 3 friends to play with, things are crowded and cumbersome. If you can't though, you can add frustrating to that list, as you need to count on your AI-controlled companions to work with you. Whenever you need more than one Kirby to accomplish a task, the AI is unpredictable. It attempts to mimic your intentions, but it's easily distracted and sometimes flat out ignores you. It's a great concept, and the GBA absolutely deserved a must-have Kirby adventure, but upon reflection, the Amazing Mirror ain't it. Number 19, Dedede's Drum Dash Deluxe, 2014, 3DS. Dedede's Drum Dash Deluxe has the interesting distinction of being the only game on this entire list that doesn't have the word Kirby in the title. In fact, Kirby's not even a character in the game at all, though you will see him in some artwork, so you won't have to go cold turkey. Drum Dash Deluxe is a rhythm game with some extremely mild platforming elements. Mild does not mean easy, to be clear, it just means that most of what you're doing will be rhythm-based. One immediate plus is the fact that you're playing along to Kirby music, which is some of the happiest, most satisfying music in human history. On that particular note, that's a music joke, do you like that? It is a success. Sadly though, there aren't many tracks to enjoy, with a few of the most famous ones missing completely. There are also only 7 levels in the game, though each of them do have more difficult variants. If you own Triple Deluxe, you'll be glad to know that the 4 stages from that game don't repeat here, but there's little replayability outside of whatever your innate need for perfection is. As you bounce along drums at the bottom of the screen, you'll have to time your button presses to get Dedede to the correct height, collect coins along the way, and, if you're feeling flashy, clap on the backbeat while you're in the air. It's difficult to master, but once you do, it does feel great to pull off. We just wish there were more of it, as it still feels like a minigame, but a minigame we had to pay for. Number 18, Kirby's Blowout Blast, 2017, 3DS. The last of the side mode come full games is Kirby's Blowout Blast, this time expanding on the Kirby 3D Rumble mode from Planet Robobot. Kirby 3D Rumble was sort of a puzzler with an emphasis on efficiently clearing small stages. Kirby's Blowout Blast is that again, but with bigger stages. Your job is to perfect these levels in every way possible. Complete them quickly, avoid damage, rack up combos, you know the drill. This works to the benefit of Kirby's Blowout Blast. Kirby games are rarely about difficulty, and finishing each stage here isn't difficult either. But by emphasizing what would otherwise be self-imposed challenges, it becomes clear how satisfying these games can be. All of that is good, and the boss fights are genuine highlights, but there isn't much depth to this one. Which is ironic because at the time, this was the closest we had to a true 3D Kirby game. It's interesting, but it's also not a concept that's going to appeal to everybody. Then again, you've seen all of the weird directions this series has taken, so none of it is going to appeal to everybody, but you know, I think you understand what I mean. Of course, that's one good thing about these standalone side mode releases. If you aren't interested, you can just ignore them. If you are interested though, you'll get a game that you'll love for just a few notes, or at least you would have, except that Nintendo shuttered the eShop. Super sorry everyone, hope you had fun while it lasted. Number 17, Kirby Star Allies, 2018, Switch. Kirby has had companions before, Kirby has been able to steal abilities before, but Kirby Star Allies sought to combine the two, in a sense, by allowing Kirby to do what he does best, charm the living flip out of everything that lays eyes on him. Here you're able to draft up to 3 enemies at a time to fight alongside you. It's an interesting way of breathing some new life into Kirby's ever-expanding rogues gallery, but it's not enough of a hook to hang an entire game upon. It's similar in many ways to what we'd already seen in Amazing Mirror and Return to Dreamland. In the former, multiple Kirbys were required for puzzle solving and progression. In the latter, multiple friends could join just for the sake of adventuring together. Star Allies is better than Amazing Mirror, but it isn't nearly as fun or robust as Return to Dreamland, which felt like a Kirby game first and multiplayer chaos second. Return to Dreamland was designed in a way that's easy to appreciate. Solid levels, a decent ramp up in challenge, memorable set pieces, and so on. Star Allies, though, often feels like it was plopped onto the screen rather than actually designed. The challenge is negligible, and the levels rarely rise above dull mindlessness. Star Allies received significant post-launch content, which helped to put a bit of meat on this otherwise bony experience, but in our eyes, that's an admission that the game was nowhere near engaging enough to begin with. It's worth a spin for fans, but it's also an easy one to skip if you just want to play the highlights. Number 16, Kirby Triple Deluxe, 2014, 3DS. Kirby Triple Deluxe sells itself on containing 3 games, and one of them is a full, proper Kirby adventure. That alone elevates it above Superstar, but the other two are Kirby Fighters and Dedede's Drum Dash, which got spun off into their own titles anyway, so they're not worth focusing on here. Of the main game though, well, there's no polite way to say this. Triple Deluxe is fine and it's well made, but it also feels very by the numbers. There's precious little in the way of heart here. It is, indeed, a Kirby game on the 3DS. Whatever you're imagining is exactly what you get, no more, no less. That's not a bad thing, but it is disappointing, as it's a rare Kirby game that doesn't feel interested in being more. At no point do you really need to think about what you're doing, and the entire thing feels shallow. You move through recognizable environments and fight recognizable enemies with only two real tweaks, neither of which are all that great. The first is the ability to tilt your 3DS to slide things around the screen. Fortunately, this gimmick is used relatively rarely, but when the best praise you can offer is, "at least I don't have to do it often," that's not good. Secondly, there's the Hypernova, which permits Kirby to suck up bigger things. It basically allows you to turn your brain off for entire sequences, and since the game already struggled to keep us engaged, that is not a great inclusion.
Number 15. Kirby Tilt and Tumble, 2001. Game Boy Color. Kirby Tilt and Tumble is definitely one of those you-had-to-be-there games. Its cartridge had special accelerometers built into it, allowing it to respond to tilt controls, but owning the cartridge wasn't enough. You had to own a Game Boy Color or other hardware that had the cartridge slot in the same place. The Game Boy Advance SP, for instance, played Game Boy Color games fine, but because the cartridge slot was on the bottom, the accelerators would not read your tilting correctly. As such, playing Kirby Tilt and Tumble today requires a bit more than simply picking up a copy, but it's worth it for the novelty alone. You tilt the Game Boy Color to roll Kirby around and flick the system upward to get him to bounce. Surprisingly, it feels quite good. As much as the strange control style could have held the game back, it ends up being the best part of the experience. Why? Well, because Kirby Tilt and Tumble hates you. For a game about rolling a squishy marshmallow friend through colourful environments, it is absolutely brutal in its difficulty. Levels are long, complicated, and full of instant death traps. They require both immediate reaction and precise use of motion controls, and you can imagine how easily those things go together. Oh, and did I mention the tight time limit? I know Kirby games are often derided for being too easy, but nobody was asking for Kirby Tilt and Tumble to stomp us repeatedly in the skull until we died. It's by no means a bad game, but it works hard to be downright impenetrable. Number 14. Kirby's Block Ball, 1995. Game Boy. Kirby's Block Ball is basically what Kirby's Pinball Land should have been. Here, the obvious template is Breakout, but I can't imagine anyone could play this for more than 30 seconds and conclude that it's just Breakout. For starters, you are often controlling multiple paddles, which both keeps you engaged at least twice as frequently and increases your options for aiming the ball where you need it to be. Then, of course, there are the abilities that you can absorb from enemies. They each give you some kind of increase in power and control, which helps reinforce the idea that your progress is genuinely skill-based. It's quite good, and a huge improvement from Pinball Land. In that game, an unfortunate rebound could drop you off the screen without any hope of recovery. Here in Block Ball, unfortunate rebounds and unlucky angles still happen, but you have more ways of dealing with them. That not only makes the game feel more fair, but it opens up a lot more room for strategizing. If we have any real complaint, it's that it still ends up feeling repetitive after a while. That's not so bad. Game Boy games were often designed for short play sessions, but it's worth mentioning. The timed challenges and disappearing items can also get a bit annoying, as it's easy for them to show up when the ball is nowhere near them. Just a few more seconds on the clock would have gone a long way, but that's nitpicking. Kirby's Block Ball doesn't do much, but everything it does right. Number 13. Kirby Fighters 2, 2020. Switch. Like the Kirby Clash games, Kirby Fighters was a side mode that became a standalone release and then got a sequel. But don't worry, unlike those games, Kirby Fighters 2 actually attempts to give you content for your money instead of imaginary currency. It's a crazy idea, but it just might work. In fact, it works quite well. It's not a must-own Switch game, but it's very clear about what it's trying to be. It's also a much fuller experience with more stages, more abilities, and more characters, making it feel like a proper sequel as opposed to simply being a Switch version of Kirby Fighters. There's even a story mode, which is shockingly not terrible, being as it's a story mode in a fighting game. You'll also receive randomized options for powering up as you progress, making things feel different from run to run. It's nothing groundbreaking, but for an inexpensive online fighting game, it's actually really quite impressive, and it's packed with references and allusions to Kirby's past adventures. It's a celebration of the little guy, which just happens to take the form of the little guy beating the tar out of everyone and everything that opposes him. It's violently adorable. Admittedly, there is a slight whiff of "we have Super Smash Bros. Ultimate at home" about it, but that's practically unavoidable. Taken on its own merits, Kirby Fighters 2 is a good time, and hopefully an indication of high-quality spin-offs still to come. Number 12. Kirby's Dream Land, 1992, Game Boy. Playing Kirby's Dream Land today, it's difficult to focus on what's there as opposed to what isn't there. This wasn't a problem in 1992, but it's strange to play a Kirby platformer in which he can't absorb abilities. It's also extremely short. It's very easy. The water with the stars in it reminds our writer of that disgusting Orbits drink, and Kirby isn't even pink. Well, right, I know nothing had color on the original Game Boy, but unless you had the Japanese version, he was white on the box too. What a fraud! In fact, aside from featuring Sweet Blob Kirby and Psycho Penguin King Dedede, this feels more like a proof of concept than an actual installment, and yet it's one hell of a good proof of concept, and it's no wonder that it spawned such a beloved franchise. The graphics are lovely, embracing their simplicity in a way that allows them to be profoundly expressive. Little animations between levels give Kirby a huge amount of personality, and the music, though there's admittedly little of it, is fantastic, with some of the series' most enduring compositions coming out of the primitive Game Boy speaker. Playing through it will leave you with the better part of an hour to use as you see fit, and while a secret harder difficulty is revealed to you after you finish the game, it still won't put up much of a fight. But fight isn't really what Kirby's Dream Land is about. It's a lovely, relaxing experience with charm to spare. The series has gotten better, but it started off pretty well from the get-go. Number 11. Kirby's Dream Land 2, 1995. Game Boy. We're ranking this ahead of Kirby's Dream Land, but the margin isn't nearly as comfortable as we'd like it to be. First, the good. You get a lot more for your money here. As opposed to the 4 proper levels in the previous game, now you explore 7 entire worlds. Additionally, there are hidden collectibles that allow you to find and face a hidden final boss, meaning that by sheer volume of content, this game is superior. It also, impressively, allows you to copy enemies' abilities, and it alters those abilities depending upon which animal companion you've got with you. Oh, right, yes, and the game has animal companions. The only thing more adorable than Kirby is Kirby riding a hamster, and I think every last one of us can agree on that. With so many more stages though, the average quality drops severely, and far too many of them rely on mazes or auto-scrolling. Those things don't make the game more challenging, but they do make it significantly less fun. Then there's the fact that the Game Boy doesn't quite seem to be able to handle it. It's impressive that Kirby can do so many things in this game, but it results in a game that suffers from intermittent lag and eaten inputs. It feels rough and undercooked in a way that its predecessor didn't. There's more here, there's no question about that, but it also has significantly more bloat. Overall, it's good, but with some tweaking and trimming, it could have been great. Number 10. Kirby Air Ride, 2003, GameCube. Kirby Air Ride is guaranteed to spark significant disagreement wherever it ends up on a list like this. It's a polarizing game, and let me be very clear that I understand that. On the surface, it's Kirby Kart, a simple racer with a cute mascot, crazy environments, and lots of ways to end friendships. Classic framework, really. But Kirby's Air Ride simplifies the experience in some ways, which in turn complicate it in other ways. Confused? So were most people who played the game. In Kirby's Air Ride, you don't control the acceleration. Instead, you scoot ahead automatically. You do have control of the braking, however, which is your only hope of cleanly navigating the track. The braking also becomes, if you hold it down long enough, a boost, meaning that it's something you will have to use often, either because you want to slow down or speed up. It's a unique control style that, in our eyes, works quite well, but we understand why many players would have jumped ship to a more traditional alternative. Say, Mario Kart Double Dash. Now that is an overrated racing game, but we've been through that on another list. Kirby Air Ride is a lot of fun once you adjust to the kind of game it actually is, but it didn't do itself any favors by looking so much like games that played totally differently. If you tried it and gave up on it long ago, it's worth another shot with fresh eyes. Of course, if eBay prices are anything to go by, it's also worth at least 1 kidney, so up to you, really. Number 9. Kirby's Return to Dreamland, 2011, Wii. When the title is basically Kirby's Dream Land with added return to, you'd be forgiven for expecting this game to harken back to Kirby's earliest days or to lean into features of the Dreamland games that we haven't seen since. That is not what this game does. The European name was Kirby's Adventure Wii, which instead implies that it harkens back to that NES classic. That is also not what it does. 0 for 2, Kirby, come on. Instead, it's just a fairly standard Kirby game, really. It's a very good one, but it actually draws inspiration from New Super Mario Bros. Wii, allowing simultaneous co-op with up to 3 friends. The story involves helping a spacefaring traveler repair his ship and get back home, and it brings previous friends and foes together in service of a greater goal: illegally harboring space aliens. Kirby, you used to be so squeaky clean, what happened? You can of course play the game on your own, and it's a perfectly fine experience that way. In fact, if you played it in 2011, it probably seemed even better because there hadn't been a true Kirby platformer since Kirby 64 in 2000. Kirby's Epic Yarn was great, but it didn't scratch the same itch for many. Really though, Return to Dreamland shines in multiplayer, and that's by far the preferable way of experiencing it. Take that away and you're left with a very good game that, in retrospect, is overshadowed by a number of better ones. There's little it does wrong, but we think the rest of these games do more right.
Number 8. Kirby's Dream Course, 1994, SNES. Many series end up in strange spin-off land at some point, but few series have spin-offs as good as this one. In fact, Kirby's Dream Course is not just one of the best spin-offs overall, but it may actually be the very best spin-off in which the main character is suddenly a golf ball ever made. The game was originally designed as a unique title called Special T-Shot, which itself did see release through the Satellaview, but developer HAL Laboratory realised that Kirby & Co. fit the experience like a glove. HAL was right. Dream Course works brilliantly as a Kirby game, taking into account not just his shape, but his penchant for absorbing various abilities and working them into his moveset, which comes in handy as you're trying to smack him around the course and sink him into the holes. As a golf game, it's darn good, and there's always room for creativity in how exactly you intend to clear the stage. And I do mean clear the stage, as unlike in real golf, you need to defeat all but one of the enemies on the course, with the final one transforming into the hole. At least, I don't think that's how real golf works, but if it is, I'm even worse at that sport than I thought I was. This lends a welcome puzzle element to things, as you need to not just decide how to hit all of the baddies, but think ahead to which powers you'll need, and which enemies to hit in what sequence. It's a spin-off done right, and that's something I wish I could say more often. Number 7. Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, 2015, Wii U. Kirby and the Rainbow Curse, or Kirby and the Rainbow Paintbrush, because we just can't leave these names alone, can we? Is much like Canvas Curse in many obvious ways, but is far better in ones that are not as immediately apparent. As with that game, it's your job to keep Kirby rolling along by dragging a stylus across a touchscreen. Unlike Canvas Curse, however, Rainbow Curse feels more like a game than a single experimental concept. The levels are bigger and more complex, the challenge has increased substantially, and the game is just gorgeous. As in handsome Squidward, but instead Kirby gorgeous. Rainbow Curse has an incredible claymation aesthetic that makes me wish more games would attempt something like this. It's beautiful stuff, with every obstacle, enemy, and level element being lovingly sculpted. All of which makes what I'm about to say that much more painful. The game is for the Wii U, meaning you won't experience these gorgeous visuals on your television. Instead, they'll be displayed on the little gamepad on your lap. Now, the visuals still look quite good down there, if you can see anything through all of that dust, but for one of the runaway best looking games in the entire series, quite good doesn't really do it justice. Rainbow Curse is doomed to be remembered as a sequel nobody asked for on a system nobody bought, but those who do seek it out are in for a surprisingly fun time. Number 6. Kirby's Dream Land 3, 1997, SNES. Kirby's Dream Land 3 gets so much right, and yet it isn't held in very high regard. It received middling reviews from critics, fans disliked how slight it felt after the previous year's Kirby Superstar, and it missed out on releasing in Europe and Australia entirely. Scrape away all of that pesky context, however, and you've got a truly excellent swan song for the original Dreamland trilogy. The graphics are nowhere near as great as Yoshi's Island, but it does strive for a similar hand-drawn aesthetic that works really well. It also improves upon the innovations that Kirby's Dream Land 2 attempted, fleshing them out and realising them better on superior hardware. The soundtrack too is excellent, and each level has side objectives that must be completed in order to see the true ending. All of that is great. The game's not perfect, however. It's fitting enough that Kirby moves sluggishly, but many of the stages would benefit from pacing that was just a bit faster. And the side objectives are left deliberately vague, which we respect, but a few of them will be extremely difficult to work out, even on repeat playthroughs. That holds Kirby's Dream Land 3 back a bit, certainly, but it often achieves greatness, striking an impressive balance between accessibility and challenge in its later levels particularly. Also, if you successfully complete all of the side objectives, Kirby gets to wield the Love stick, which, now that I've said it out loud, makes me feel very dirty, and I'd like to move on, please. Number 5? Yeah, number 5. Number 5, Kirby's Epic Yarn, 2010, Wii. Kirby's Epic Yarn is another divisive game, this time owing entirely to the first word in its title. By 2010, people knew what to expect from Kirby platformers. They had very specific ideas in mind, and Epic Yarn barely even touched upon them. There's a reason for that. The game was originally about a new character called Prince Fluff. The little prince was relegated to a co-starring role, though, when Kirby stepped in, bringing the weight of expectation along with him. But ignore the fact that it doesn't feel much like a Kirby game, and focus on the fact that it's a very, very good game on its own. There is immense charm behind every aspect of the presentation, from its gorgeous arts and crafts visual style to its incredible soundtrack full of bright, twinkly piano melodies. Every second of the game manages to be the cutest thing you've ever seen in your life, and always manages to be outdone in that regard by the next second of the game. Critics be critiquing though, and no shortage of them derided it for being too easy because, quote, you can't die, which is correct, and if making it to the end of the game is your only criterion for difficulty, Kirby's Epic Yarn does come up short. But that's not entirely fair. The game rewards you at the end of the level based on the number of beads you're holding, and keeping them requires you to explore thoroughly and avoid damage. A child can reach the end, sure, but an adult will still have to work to master it. A spiritual successor, Yoshi's Woolly World, made it to the Wii U, and that game is similarly great. Between the two of them, we hope we haven't seen the last yarn-based game by Nintendo. I mean, Woolly Wario Land has got to be just around the corner, right? Right? Number 4, Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards, 2000, Nintendo 64. Go ahead, name a cuter game for the Nintendo 64. I would love to see you try. Actually, I wouldn't, because there isn't one, and I wouldn't love to see you lie to my face like that. No, not even Yoshi's Story. Stop bringing up Yoshi. We'll rank the Yoshi games when we're good and ready. Anyway, whereas many traditionally 2D video game universes looked necessarily rough in their first 3D outing, the basic shapes and bright colours of the Kirby world translated exceedingly well. Then again, the characters and stages are 3D, but the gameplay isn't. Kirby still only moves left, right, up and down, which at times feels limiting, because the stages look huge and inviting, and you're restricted to a single plane. That disappointment wears off quickly though when you see how much there is to do and enjoy on that single plane. Kirby 64 is almost relentlessly charming, with nearly every stage having some kind of memorable sequence. Other games in the series allow you to combine abilities, but it's never felt as creative and fun as it feels here. Combine ice and electricity, for instance, and you turn into a fridge. Or combine fire and needles to turn into a bow that fires flaming arrows. Not all of the combinations are useful, but learning the ways in which they combine is a huge part of the fun, as they make a big difference in how easy or difficult it is to complete certain levels. Kirby games are usually wholesome, comforting entertainment for the whole family, and Kirby 64 is no different, even if it does feature a sequence in which a painter gets her face chewed off by a demon from the depths of hell. Such is the power of Kirby, I suppose. Even abject horror is rendered cute and cuddly by his mere proximity. When you think about it like that, the world needs you now more than ever, Kirby. Number 3. Kirby Planet Robobot, 2016, 3DS. Kirby in a mech shouldn't work, and yet it works better than most other Kirby gimmicks that should work. It's the most adorable work of mech fiction ever. Mobile suit gumdrop, if you will. The game is, frankly, great. If you've sat through the rest of this list wondering loudly, what do you even want from a Kirby game? Perhaps even going so far as to type it clumsily into the comments section below. Well, the answer is Kirby Planet Robobot. Everything about it just feels correct. There's so much love and care invested in it, and that love and care manifests in its stage design, its bosses, and even what should have been the worst possible gimmick Kirby ever had to endure, the mech. Part of the reason it fits so well is that unlike the Hypernova of Triple Deluxe, the mech doesn't just give you the chance to blow mindlessly through entire sequences, or should that be suck mindlessly? I don't know. The mech is used to solve puzzles, to access optional areas, and to vary the gameplay in a way that feels meaningful. There's also an abundance of top-notch design, with a great use of the 3DS's depth, making it feel as though the developers learned a lot from Triple Deluxe, and were keen to take advantage of that knowledge here. Planet Robobot tests the player on their understanding of how the various levels of depth interact and on their spatial awareness, giving you a reason to pay attention that isn't specifically tied to overt challenge. The soundtrack is great, the story is fun, and the abilities pull double duty thanks to the fact that your mech gets to use them in unique ways as well. It's an impressive little game, and was one of our biggest surprises whilst making this list. Number 2. Kirby's Adventure, 1993, NES. Kirby's Adventure is not just a great 2D platformer, it's a highlight of the genre and of the NES overall. Everybody will have their own personal favourites, of course, but Kirby's Adventure is a firm contender for the titles of Best Looking NES Game, Best Sounding NES Game, and Best NES Game full stop. It's so well made that even if you ignored the constraints of the hardware, it's difficult to imagine how it could be improved. It's full of secrets, the copy abilities are impressively integrated into the gameplay, and it's just fun. If games are meant to bring us joy, then Kirby's Adventure must be one of the medium's crowning achievements. With few exceptions, this is the magic the series has been attempting to replicate ever since. In fact, it's not surprising that nearly all of Kirby's platformers to follow were strictly 2D. Once you come so close to perfection, is it even worth shaking things up with a third dimension? That will surely only pull you further away from the heights you once achieved. Sometimes Kirby makes some animal friends. Sometimes he splits into a collection of smaller Kirbys. Sometimes he hops into a robot to pound 7 shades of screws out of anyone who gets in his way. And sometimes those ideas work quite well and lead to memorable games of their own. But here, in only his second outing on a dinky little NES, Kirby had an adventure so pure, so well designed, so brimming with personality, that it's been difficult for any game to measure up since. Kirby's Adventure isn't trying to do much beyond provide an excellent platformer, but that's what it does flawlessly. It just wants to be the very best game it can be. That's a fair goal, and impressively, it succeeds. Few long-running series managed to come anywhere near the heights of this one, and this was only Kirby's second outing. I tell ya, this guy makes it look easy. Speaking of which, here's Ben Potter.
Number 1. Kirby and the Forgotten Land, 2022. Switch. First things first, there will be no spoilers in this entry. Second things second, Kirby and the Forgotten Land was by far the most difficult game to rank, not because we didn't know how we felt about it, but because it's impossible to know how we will eventually feel about it. The other games on this list have all had years to reveal their flaws and settle into a rough order of preference. This game, at the time of recording, has had almost no time at all. It's possible that in a year we won't quite love it as much. It's equally possible that we'll love it even more.
No matter what, we don't see Kirby and the Forgotten Land being dethroned anytime soon. It feels perfectly at home on the Switch, where so many of Nintendo's aging IPs are experiencing a renaissance. Super Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, and now Kirby and the Forgotten Land all feel like exciting glimpses forward for how these franchises will evolve.
For Kirby, the way forward seems to be a long overdue leap into true 3D, with an expected evolution of his copy abilities and a far less expected reliance on environmental storytelling. Kirby and the Forgotten Land takes place in what very much looks like a post-apocalyptic Earth. The detritus of modern life is heaped about, and it's your job to pick through the ruins, rescuing waddle-dees from the marauding baddies. Again, no spoilers, but it's a striking backdrop for Kirby's innate cuteness.
Speaking of which, the cuteness has never been cutenesser. Everything feels, looks, and sounds brilliant, and for the first time, it feels as though it's worth using any copy ability at any point. There are correct paths in which to use them, of course, but everything has been perfectly balanced, letting you decide how to proceed at almost every junction. There are admittedly fewer copy abilities than usual, but the novelty of the mouthful abilities more than makes up for that.
The puzzles are fun, the boss fights are the best in the series, and the enemies are so adorable you'll almost feel bad for chewing their spines out. Almost.
Kirby and the Forgotten Land is a great reminder that when they really want to, Nintendo still know how to conjure an entire game out of pure magic. The happiest of birthdays to our little pink friend.